Okay, again, thank you for joining. I know we have some folks that are continuing to trickle in through the introduction, so welcome. I'm going to do just a quick housekeeping information before I turn it over to Puna, because we do have a lot of information to get through today, and I don't want to take up too much of that time. Hi, everyone. My name is Shirley Liu. I am a program manager with the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence. We're super excited to be hosting this webinar today. We'll be talking about the Pasifika Power and Control Wheel Translation Project, which was a project led by Puna, who you see here with us today, in the project with together with community advocates and consultants to adapt the traditional power and control wheel that I'm sure we all know very well, to reflect the experiences, the languages of Pasifika survivors and communities. So super interesting project. We developed glossaries and guides and so forth, which Puna will share more about. In terms of housekeeping, we will be recording this webinar, and it will be available on our website a couple days after today. So feel free to share that with your colleagues and networks when that's up. We do have captioning provided today, and you can access that by clicking the options in your Zoom toolbar. It should be at the bottom of your screen. You may need to click the little ... to open up more options. From there, you can adjust the size and how the captions appear today. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to add any questions that you have into the Q&A box so we can keep them all organized, and we will leave a little bit of time at the end of the webinar to answer and address any questions. Also, feel free to share any reflections or thoughts or comments that you have about the webinar as we go. I will be here to provide any tech support or logistics backup as needed, but now I will just go ahead and turn it over to Puna.
Thank you so much, Shirley. Hi, aloha, talofa lava, everyone. My name, again, is Matāpuna Levenson. Feel free to call me Puna. And I am a project manager with the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence. I have been with the Institute for a year this month. And prior to my role with the Institute, I was the Training and Technical Assistance Director for the Hawaii State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I'm a former victim advocate. I love the work of direct services and appreciate all of you being here today to learn more about this incredible project. So I want to first start with some acknowledgements. Before I dive into the main content of this webinar, I first want to acknowledge the survivors who have and continue to lead the anti-violence movement, many of whom become advocates for other survivors and leaders in various victim services agencies and programs. I also want to acknowledge the community-based organizations doing culturally specific work to address and prevent gender-based violence, which is critical to social change. I also want to acknowledge that many of us may be coming to this space, carrying the weight of myriad stressors in both our personal and professional lives, all within the context of multiple societal crises. So I want to thank you for choosing to share this time and space with us. So as a result of this webinar, you should be able to describe the connection between culture and gender-based violence, evaluate your organization or program's policies and practices as it relates to culturally responsive, survivor-centered, and community-driven service provision, outreach and education, research, and more. And you should also be able to develop your own project or program to address and prevent gender-based violence in your respective community that reflects culturally responsive, survivor-centered, and community-driven values. So some of you may already know this information, but for those of you who are new to the Institute, I want to share a little bit about our organization. So the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence, also known as API-GBV or the Institute, We are a national resource center on domestic violence, sexual violence, trafficking, and other forms of gender-based violence in Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, Middle Eastern, and North African communities. Our mission is to disrupt gender-based violence, which causes physical, sexual, emotional, spiritual, and economic harm within Asian and Pacific Islander communities throughout the United States and territories. And we envision a world free of gender-based violence for communities with equal opportunities for all to thrive. The Institute works together with and within our communities to uplift the voices and experiences of Asian and Pacific Islander communities who are impacted by violence, by building capacity through training and technical assistance support for organizations who serve our diverse communities, by engaging allied communities and systems to create shifts in gendered cultural norms and addressing injustices, by educating our Asian and Pacific Islander communities to mobilize to prevent gender-based violence, and by advocating for policies and practices that ensure access to essential rights and services. So many of you have likely worked with myself or one of my colleagues, whether it's Shirley through our resource center or our language access team. These are all the different programs that we provide as a national cultural specific resource center. So our agenda for today is broken into 3 parts. First, I'm going to give some background on the Pasifika Power Control Wheel translation project. And then I'm going to provide an overview of the project itself by talking about the main components and methodology of the project, as well as the key findings and recommendations. And then I'm going to end with an overview of the actual resources themselves, and then give some time to answer any of your questions about the project, about the resources themselves. And hopefully we will have some of the consultants that we were so fortunate to partner with on this project who helped put together, translate, and create a lot of these resources. And you may have a chance to ask them directly and get to know them today. So some background on Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders in the US. There are approximately 1.6 million Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders residing within the continental US and affiliated islands, making up 0.4% of the total US population. Our ancestral origins are connected to the geographical regions known colonially as Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. The largest share of representation among Pasifika peoples in the US are Native Hawaiians, Samoans, and Chamorro, with the top 5 states of residence for Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders being Hawaii, California, Washington, Texas, and Florida. It's important to know that although Pasifika peoples share ancestral lineages, cultural and linguistic similarities, and experiences with colonization, imperialism, militarization, and settler colonialism, developing educational resources and tools to address domestic violence and other forms of gender-based violence under a pan-Pacific, even an NHPI umbrella, for example, can do a disservice to the unique dynamics, cultural nuances, and disparate impacts of oppression on our communities. So it is from this understanding that the Institute co-designed in partnership with Native Hawaiian, Samoan, and Chuukese consultants and community members, the glossaries, listening sessions, educational visuals, and cultural frameworks that were part of this project to honor these important differences. So what are we seeing regarding violence against women and girls in the Pacific? So UN Women estimates between 60 to 80% of women and girls in the Pacific will experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetimes. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, Oceania or the Pacific had the 3rd highest rate of females killed exclusively by intimate partners in 2017. The nature and extent of this type of violence among Pasifika peoples residing in or who are affiliated with the United States is lesser known due to the lack of disaggregated data and underreporting. However, there are some studies which are helping to open opportunities for further exploration and examination. So for example, among Pacific Islanders in Utah, one study found participants reported experience, at least 37% experienced physical abuse as children, 9% experienced sexual abuse, and 31% had witnessed domestic abuse as children. The Office of Hawaiian Affairs found that Native Hawaiian females experienced unwanted sex by an intimate partner 1.5 times more than their non-Hawaiian peers. And in the third study of a research series on sex trafficking in Hawaii, the researchers found that of the nearly 100 sex trafficking victims who participated in the study from one agency, 64% identified as being Native Hawaiian. Gender violence is perpetuated by cultural beliefs and norms based on the devaluation of women and is legitimized, obscured, or denied by familial and social institutions. Gender violence is the most extreme expression of gender oppression. Its presence tells us about the presence of inequality, and the extent of the violence tells us about the extent of inequality. So culture is going to be a term and a phrase that's going to be thrown around a lot today in our presentation. But I want to kind of uplift and present some thoughts to be a little bit more expansive of what we mean by culture in regards to gender-based violence. So we know that culture nurtures pride, resilience, belonging, and connection to community. And it is also used to justify gender violence and inequality. So there are three domains of culture that actually perpetuate gender-based violence. The first is the culture of gender-based violence, which devalues women, girls, and LGBTQ individuals. It normalizes or minimizes abuse. It claims that gender-based violence is accidental. It ignores sexism. It promotes an unhealthy, aggressive form of masculinity. And it uses men's achievements to exonerate, excuse, or deny the impact of their behavior. The second is the culture of families and ethnic and identity-specific communities, which prescribe and maintain traditional patriarchal gender norms and roles. They define what is considered transgressions from these norms. They patrol the boundaries of what they deem is and is not culturally acceptable, and enforce compliance through violence, coercion, pressure, and rejection. And the last is the culture of systems, which can create barriers to services and resources where race and gender bias compromise access to justice. So survivors, for example, have to function with the culture within cultures of shelters, of the courts, of the criminal and civil legal system, within immigration systems, child welfare systems. And it can also be so prescriptive as to not meeting people's needs. So for example, in a shelter setting, this could be excessive rules, which can make just seeking refuge and rest impossible. Or systems, policies, and procedures, often putting the onus on victims instead of providing the resources or justice. Cultural-specific advocacy rests on a foundation of designing programs to serve ethnic or identity-specific groups. And it takes into account their identity, history, language, and context of historical marginalization and oppression, with advocates drawing on their knowledge of and connection to their community's social, political, cultural, and gender issues. Culturally specific community-based organizations who are our primary constituents, right, as a National Cultural Specific Resource Center. These organizations address community-specific types and dynamics of gender-based violence, working to counteract stigma within our communities and discrimination within systems. So there have been over 160 Asian and Pacific Islander-led and targeted program service provision agencies since 2016. And these Asian and Pacific Island advocates who founded these cultural specific programs were adapting existing models, creating new ones, developing innovative practices and policies out of design and out of necessity, incorporating our cultural context. So what you see are some of the main tenets of cultural specific advocacy that we at the Institute promote. So for example, an analysis of intersectionality, patriarchy, and root causes, which are fundamental to program design, culturally specific programming, such as designing services that address Asian and Pacific Island ethnic and linguistic diversity, and survivor-centered advocacy, which is based on culturally specific analysis and definitions of domestic and family violence. Another model or framework that I wanted to share with you all as kind of the background and the foundation to the Pacific Translation Project is community-based participatory research, or CBPR. So CBPR represents the fullest expression of community-engaged research, where researchers and community members share power, resources, and decision-making at every step of the research process, from identifying questions to interpreting and applying results to disseminating findings. The goal of community-based participatory research is to enhance understanding of a particular issue. So it could be domestic violence or other forms of gender-based violence in this case, by collaborating with those who are most affected by it, and taking the knowledge gained to improve the health and well-being of community members, or in integrating knowledge with action. So some of the guiding values and principles of community-based participatory research include a commitment to building relationships founded on transparency and trust, building on each party or stakeholder strengths, resources, and interests, and attending to the individual and structural power and work toward redistributing power more equitably. So I just went through real fast a lot of information to provide hopefully a better grounding, a foundation for what our project was and is. So I'm excited now just to dive in and talk a little bit more about that. The Pasifika Power Control Wheel Translation Project is part of the Institute's initiative of translating and developing educational resources and tools on gender-based violence. So this can include domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking in Asian and Pacific communities, but in this instance, for this particular project, in Indigenous Pacifica languages and cultures. The purpose of the project is really to build the capacity of individuals, families, community-based organizations, systems responders, allied professionals with culturally responsive resources in implementing their prevention and intervention gender-based violence work. And specifically targeting this service provision, advocacy, education, and work to our Pasifika communities in the US and affiliated territories. So in preparation for the development of these resources, the translation of materials, we had to trace the genealogy of this resource development. So what I'm very excited is to talk a little bit more about what inspired us at the Institute. And that was the Power and Control Wheel, the original Power and Control Wheel, which we recognize is the most widely used and recognizable educational tool that represents the lived experiences of women who have been harmed by an intimate partner, as well as describes the tactics used by intimate partners who harm to gain and maintain power and control wheel. There have been numerous iterations and adaptations of the Power and Control Wheel to reflect diverse communities, and again, was the inspiration for our work. So we were very fortunate to have the support of our colleagues at Duluth at the Domestic Abuse Intervention Programs, some of who are here today. So welcome, thank you for being here and supporting us. And similar to the Power and Control Wheel, the Institute actually developed our own resource or tool, which is the Lifetime Spiral. And the Lifetime Spiral of Violence actually reveals patterns of victimization by specifying some of the types of violence, vulnerabilities, and harms that Asian women and girls face. So the important distinctions of how violence is perpetrated and experienced in Asian communities are highlighted in this Lifetime Spiral, including the presence of different abusers located over the life course, and that violence is often experienced in the context of additional oppressions. So based on race, age, sexual orientation, class, immigration status, and more. So in summary, what the lifetime spiral tells us is that one, gender violence is historical, it is not accidental. Two, that women and girls and others can be exposed to or be vulnerable to many types of abuses over the lifetime. And finally, that a range of abusers or perpetrators are located over the life course. So with that, with this foundation and tracing our resource development to these previous projects and resources, from May to September of 2021 of last year, our team of Native Hawaiian, Samoan, and Chuukese consultants translated and developed terms and frameworks derived from and inspired by the original Power and Control Wheel, but in Olelo Hawaii, Ngangana Samoa, and Kapasen Chuuk, which are the native languages of the indigenous peoples of Hawaii, Samoa, and Chuuk. We had a total of 8 consultants who were identified through the Institute's network and relationships with community-based organizations and advocates as critical partners and collaborators on the project. And we did so because of their expertise and their life experience as Native Hawaiian, Samoan, and Chuukese advocates, community leaders, educators, researchers, and cultural practitioners. So our project consultants employed models in the translation of terms and concepts derived from the Power and Control Wheel in Indigenous Pasifika languages. So the Brislin model of translation, for example, has been widely used in cross-cultural research and is a form of back translation where the text of one language is retranslated or back translated to another language. And the purpose of this method of translation is to ensure equivalence between the original and translated texts or versions of a specific text. And what you see here is an example of a translation rubric designed by one of our lead consultants, Dr. Michael Lingalinga. So in addition to this translation rubric, our consultants utilize an array of resources in the translation process. So that includes utilizing existing in-language domestic violence literature, language dictionaries, online language databases, in-language newspapers, and historical documents, such as the image that you see here of Kalahui, Hawaii from Ulukau, which is the Hawaiian Electronic Library, which can be accessed for free online. So our project consultants, Kekai Lindsay and Ho'olena Ioane, they shared, and I quote, "One important component of this process was to find Olelo Hawaii accounts that included reports of domestic violence. Some of these accounts came from Hawaiian literature or mo'olelo, or articles written in Hawaiian language newspapers and other documents. This component assisted in establishing terms that had already been used in the 19th and early 20th century connected to domestic violence," end quote. So consultation with cultural practitioners and other language experts was a really important part of the translation process. And our consultants utilized this expertise as well as their own language fluency, cultural competency, interpretation and translation experience, and life experience to inform the translation process. Now, a key aspect of the project was engaging our Pasifika communities through listening sessions. And this was to elicit feedback and to inform the translation process and resource development. And also as an important cultural value and practice when engaging in important work that impacts our communities. So beginning in June of last year, 2021, 8 listening sessions have actually taken place across Native Hawaiian, Samoan, and Chuukese communities in the continental US and in the Pacific. So participants were identified and invited through the networks of our project consultants, community-based organizations, and the Institute. So 86 individuals participated in virtual listening sessions and were carefully recruited by our project consultants to ensure diverse representation across Pasifika communities. And that is with respect to the cultural protocols and dynamics. So with attention to gender, age, profession, title, kinship, etc., within each cultural community. And participants were invited based on their cultural and linguistic expertise their work in the domestic or gender-based violence field as an advocate or service provider, and based on their life experience. Leveraging the cultural knowledge and expertise of our consultants, these listening sessions were facilitated based on the needs and composition of each group. So for example, some groups met in a hybrid format where some participants met in person at a mutual site. And this is due to the lack of access to high-speed internet, but of course, observing COVID safety protocols, while others participated through Zoom. Participation in one session was only possible due to the participants' familial kinship with the facilitators, such as by clan. So what you see here are examples of discussion questions or prompts that were used by our facilitators during listening sessions. So some of the questions were, share some examples of power and control that you have seen or observed in your life experiences, including those that demonstrate the unique dynamics found in your community. What are examples of power and control that are found in traditional stories of deity or ancestors? And do you think the words in your native language reflect the type of violence described in the Power and Control Wheel, and why? And are there any cultural barriers that inhibit full and frank discussions on domestic violence within your community? Our project team aimed to provide an environment that allowed for open and frank conversations about how participants from these specific communities viewed and defined domestic violence. So the following references some of the cultural practices or processes identified by our project consultants that were utilized in the listening sessions. So this list doesn't encompass all the possible practices used or cultural nuances that were observed within each session, but are really helpful to understanding how Pasifika peoples value connection and storytelling. So for example, for Native Hawaiians, ho'ula pinina, exploring meaningful connections and healthy relationships through Indigenous shared experiences, or the practice of kuka, which is to consult, confer, and deliberate concerns impacting the community. For Chuukese or Reichuk, it's uruo, the telling of history, or tutuna, talk story, or apuros, which is to be in deep conversation. And as Samoans, certainly talanoa, to have a deep conversation or to talk and discuss. We were very fortunate and excited to include in this project a cultural practitioner and an artist. So we commissioned master siapo maker and artist Reggie Meredith Fitial to create works inspired and informed by the Ngangana Samoa translation of the Power and Control Wheel. Siapo, also known throughout the Pacific as tapua or kapa, is the traditional fine cloth of Samoa made from the bark of the mulberry tree and uses natural dyes and ancestral motifs. Reggie came to the project as a fourth generation siapo maker who is passionate about perpetuating and uplifting her culture, as well as educating young Samoans about the power and healing that comes from and through the arts. So in addition to conversations with our project consultants, with Institute staff, and observing listening sessions with our Samoan community, Reggie's creative process actually included visual mixed media journaling that helped her in her creative process to explore the Samoan worldview and cultural lens as it relates to domestic violence. So as a result of this project and the amazing work of our consultants from the community, our partners in this work, we learned some not surprising things, but are really important that I want to uplift it and talk about and explain a little further about what those key findings were, what the lessons were learned. And first, the most obvious was that direct translations actually don't work. So what I mean by that is that our project consultants recognized early on that a direct translation of the original Power and Control Wheel was incredibly problematic. Not because the tactics and behaviors described in the wheel were wrong or incorrect or invaluable, but because, for example, no words existed or were easily accessible or found in uniform glossaries in these Indigenous Pacific Islander languages for terms that are used in the wheel. During the translation process, words couldn't be translated individually, but had to be translated in the context of what was being done and to whom, often resulting in long phrases, as opposed to singular terms, because those terms originated from English. And if there were words in language that correlated with English terms from the wheel, they often seem to justify or even minimize the severity of violence and abuse. And moreover, important components of the culture, the values and viewpoints of the community, including the impacts of oppression and historical trauma, were missing from the wheel. What's great in our contact and relationship with our Duluth colleagues who created the original Power Control Wheel, and who we all continue to utilize this incredible resource today, I think they recognize that this tool was taken from a specific time, context, experience, and space, and that it was expected that the Power and Control Wheel as a resource could be adapted and utilized in different settings. But it was a good lesson, a good lesson for us as the Institute, and who really advocates for language access, about the importance of context and history and the relevance for today in translation work and developing in language resources. So the second finding was, like the original Power and Control Wheel, life experience and community context, again, inform the resource and response. So although the original Power and Control Wheel may not necessarily resonate with all Pasifika communities, because the wheel was not developed based on their life experiences, perspectives, and worldviews in mind, is for this reason using the similar process of our Duluth advocates in listening to the stories of survivors, those who are most impacted by the violence, that our project consultants actually develop new frameworks grounded in Pasifika communities, stories, and experiences. So connecting through dialogue and storytelling is an important practice and value across Indigenous Pasifika communities, and worked really well for the development of the educational resources and frameworks intended to build the capacity of these communities. And then finally, that the importance and the need of communal spaces to share stories, to heal, and to identify solutions. So participants who identified as survivors, who were raised in homes where they witnessed domestic violence or experienced abuse, they related their appreciation for participating in the listening sessions because they felt heard and understood and validated by members of their own cultural community. So one participant, for example, shared, and this was in reference to a conversation about drawing strength from your genealogy, from your lineage, your connection to elders and ancestors and each other. And this participant said, quote, "If I remember those things and not be so caught up in all the things we deal with, it's a good reminder of where we came from. That part of knowing who we are is so important," end quote. A key lesson that was learned from the translation project is that spaces to convene and utilize educational resources like the Lifetime Spiral, like the Power and Control Wheel, and other educational resources and tools are really needed for Native Hawaiian, Samoan, and Chuukese communities. So although these tools could be used, and certainly should be used when working with individuals to address the cultural and community needs of Pasifika peoples, group spaces, whether in person or virtual, really need to be an important part of resource utilization. So we put together kind of a nice list of some of the recommendations that we wanted to uplift and offer to all of you. And we know that not everyone in attendance today is Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. And we're so grateful and excited that you joined us, because we definitely believe and feel deep in our hearts that our experience is not necessarily unique in some of the challenges that we faced in developing in language, cultural specific resources, But we hope that based on the lessons that we learn and the takeaways from this project, that it can benefit your work. It can benefit the work that you're doing in your respective communities. So the first recommendation is thinking of our community, those who are most impacted by violence, by any particular issue, but in this case, domestic violence, gender-based violence, to view community as the experts. And what we mean by that is as we compensate experts for their knowledge, their skills, and their expertise, so should we prioritize in our budgets, right? Our program and organization budgets to compensate community members for their participation in listening sessions or interviews as the experts that they are. And that you identify and recruit consultants from these communities and formalize and streamline your recruitment and contract processes. So many of our community members don't know what it means to be a consultant, may not have had experience. And if you are a smaller community-based organization doing culturally specific work, or who are interested in developing cultural specific work in your program, formalizing and streamlining these recruitment and contract processes are super helpful and important. And then also we recommend that you ensure diverse representation among your listening session participants, your key informant interviews, and your community advisors or work groups. So what we mean about diverse representation is life experience, profession, language fluency, age, gender, ability, faith affiliation, etc. And also to conduct ongoing community needs assessments and diversifying what we mean by receiving feedback in conducting needs assessments. So certainly it can be listening sessions, those one-on-one interviews, phone calls, conversations, surveys if needed, but really maximizing and providing varied methods of community being able to provide feedback to you. Also utilizing consultants, the findings of your needs assessments, those interviews, those surveys and listening sessions to inform every step of project planning, from design, implementation, and evaluation. And then to attend to the diverse location-specific needs when engaging with the community and with your consultants. So we learned how important it was to ensure that our listening session participants, if they were convening in person, right, and in one place because of limited connectivity or Wi-Fi, particularly in our island territories, ensuring that they have all the information and that they're observing COVID safety protocols, attending to the needs of both our community participants and also our consultants as far as literacy, including tech literacy, ensuring there's language and disability accessibility, that there's transportation if there is an in-person convening, childcare, food. These are all things that support the accessibility and engagement and the connection and the relationship building and trust building that is needed in working with our community members and our consultants from the community. So I'm just gonna take a moment. This is the final part where I'm gonna take a deeper dive into each of the actual cultural frameworks and resources. So I'm gonna take a look at the chat to see if there's any comments. And remember, if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the Q&A so I can make sure that we don't miss it at the end of the presentation. So I'm so excited to kind of highlight and provide an overview of each of our community resources by first starting with our Native Hawaiian community resources that were developed by Ho'olena Ioane and Chuukese Lindsay. So Chuukese and Ho'olena developed the Mo'ohihia framework as a result of the Olelo Hawaii translation process of the Power Control Wheel and the listening sessions that they facilitated with community. And this was informed by Chuukese's work as a confidential advocate and cultural practitioner, as well as Ho'o's historical research and work supporting Native Hawaiian educational advancement. Mo'ohihia refers to the succession of difficulties that progress through generations, reflecting the hihi or entanglement or difficult or troubling nature and impacts of intimate partner violence on Kanaka or Native Hawaiians. So focused on the image of the hale halavai, a space where community assembles to consult, to confer, and to deliberate concerns impacting the community. Mo'ohihia focuses on 5 important aspects of how intimate partner violence can be understood, experienced, and responded to really from the Native Hawaiian or Kanaka perspective. So the first is family as the catalyst, then transgenerational trauma, the preservation of the familial unit, dynamics, challenges, and barriers, and elements of abuse. So like the other consultant teams, a resource guide was actually created by our consultants to help folks learn more and become grounded in the Mo'ohihia framework by breaking down the 5 aspects to understanding domestic or intimate partner violence from a Native Hawaiian perspective. And you will also see that there was a glossary of terms that were actually based off of this cultural framework, inspired and definitely drawing from the concepts of the Power Control Wheel, but truly focusing on the Mo'ohihia framework. So for our Samoan resources, informed by the Ngana Samoan translation process of the Power Control Wheel, with our listening sessions with the Samoan community led by our project partner, Susanna Tiapula, Dr. Michael Lingalinga actually developed two frameworks to understanding and responding to domestic and gender-based violence from a Samoan cultural perspective. Ole Atua Lau Niu, the coconut leaf basket, and Ole Filinga Afa, the Senate rope braiding process. So made from the husk of a special coconut or niu, the afa is used throughout the Pacific to bind, lash, strengthen, reinforce homes, canoes, and tools, and is an important part of Samoan life. There are 4 approaches to the afa process that can help demonstrate the Samoan understanding of domestic and family violence. So the first is the choosing of the coconut or the niu and the husking. The second is soaking and pounding of the material. The third is the binding and the braiding. And the fourth is wrapping these materials into coils and then building. So from the cultural standpoint of the afa approach, choosing and husking the niu is likened to the process of understanding the issues, conversing with family and community members, selecting the issues to focus on, deconstructing narratives, and moving beyond kind of the surface the surface level issues. And understanding historical context and identifying what contributes to the problem is similar to the process of soaking and pounding the fibers of the niu. And just as the braided fibers are then wrapped into coils, so is the process of creating and building new narratives around violence and within families and relationships. So the Samoan ato plays a vital role in the day-to-day affairs of Samoan families. These baskets are usually made from the coconut fronds or pandanus leaf, and both men and women have the responsibility to weave these baskets. And each basket utilized and implemented for a specific purpose. So Dr. Lingalinga actually highlighted 6 aspects of the ato that can be applied to domestic and gender-based violence in Samoan communities. So the first is that both men and women weave. The second is the selection of these fronds. The third is the determination of the size, and then weaving of fronds, braiding the bottom of the ato, and then the circular nature of the ato. So from this cultural position, both men and women, again, contribute to addressing domestic and gender-based violence. And just as when selecting the fronds or determining the size of the basket, programs, workshops, and other interventions should be catered to the needs of the individual and the group. And weaving together and ensuring there are equal amounts of fronds highlights the potential strength of a program or service, depends on the balance between culture, services, funding, etc. The braiding the bottom of the ato and its circular nature reflects the importance of a collective effort and resources needed including the importance of communal councils to discuss these issues to address domestic and gender-based violence. So like our Native Hawaiian colleagues, resource guides were developed for each framework that you will have access to and can go into further detail about this cultural background and the main tenets of these frameworks. Dr. Lingalinga also developed the Samoan glossary of domestic violence terms based on the original Power and Control Wheel. And finally, the artworks of Reggie Meredith Fitial. So we asked initially for Reggie to create one artwork based on this process, based on this project. She created 3 because she was so passionate and inspired by everything she was learning and listening from community members in these conversations about domestic violence. So the 3 works include Va'awhioloa'i, the space in between. So this is from left to right. Siapo Malekali Malu and Va'awhioloa'i Moana. And my apologies to my community for my mispronunciations. I just wanted to say that, but thank you for sticking with me. The red tea leaves that are depicted in Va'awhioloa'i, the space in between, were specifically chosen due to the healing attributes of this plant variety. So the space between the leaves are a visual representation of the Va, or the sacred space between and that connects individuals, families, ancestors, and communities. Va as a concept is well known throughout Pasifika communities. And at the center, in the middle image, at the center of the Siapo Malekali Malu is the siapo, or the fine cloth, which is traditionally created by women. Encircling the outside of the siapo are the symbols of the malu, or the traditional tattoo that is given to women but performed by men. So when thinking about the relationships between men and women in Samoan communities, Reggie reflected on this powerful symbolism of the siapo being protected by the malu and the reciprocal nature of these 2 roles and relationships. And then the third and final work, Va'awhioloa'i Moana, continues this exploration of sacred space and relationships, particularly as it relates to how the ocean is both a connector and sacred space between the earth and sky. So these artworks, what we imagined and what we hope our Samoan community can utilize, and other communities as well, in developing their own artworks and commissioning cultural practitioners and artists to do similar work, is that these works would be utilized to facilitate conversations about domestic violence in various settings. So cultural arts workshops are something that are definitely promising practices, and we hope that as a movement in advocating and doing cultural specific work, that we can really highlight the incredible work of our cultural practitioners and artists in helping to facilitate and normalize conversations about violence and healthy relationships and all the things. And finally, our Chuukese resources. So our project consultants, Inocenta Sankiku and Paul Otoko, who we affectionately refer to as Tamana or Papa Paul, they identified early on in the Kapasen Chuuk translation process of the Power and Control Wheel that many of the behaviors described in the wheel from the Chuukese perspective were clear violations of the traditional values of Rei Chuuk or Chuukese people. And most poignantly, that they were in direct conflict with the traditional roles of Chuukese men as protectors of their partner, children, and clan. So from Inocenta's experience as an advocate and community navigator, and Tamana's research on Micronesian migration and leadership role as an elder, and informed by the translation process, our listening sessions, and over a decade's worth of conversations with elders in the Chuukese community, they created the framework of Tatan Imwe, which is broken roles, responsibilities, and values within Chuukese homes. So utilizing the image of traditional Chuukese structures, such as the house or the canoe, Tatan Imwe is focused on 3 important roles that comprise the Chuukese life or Rei Chuuk worldview. The first is the Wa, which represents individuals. The second is Imwe, which is the home and family. And the third is the Ut, or the clan and community. So understanding the traditional roles of individuals, such as men, women, children, elders, etc. Family and clan are really the foundation to understanding how domestic and gender-based violence diverges from these traditions and values. And moreover, identifies the cultural structures and the protocols that exist to both prevent and intervene when violence and abuse occurs. So one wheel was developed, and there was quite a lot of difficulty in just attempting to do this because, as we mentioned before, the translation process resulted in long, lengthy phrases. But we were able to create a wheel based on the Chuukese translation and based on the Tatanimwe framework, which will be accessible for everyone in the community. And again, also a glossary of terms in Kapasenchuk is also available. And then finally, our project report. So we had to synthesize and pull together all the different moving parts, lesson learned, the methodology, our key findings, the resources themselves, because we had to share with our community about this incredible experience, this difficult and complex experience, but one that I feel confident in saying that our project partners, our community members felt enriched and validated and affirmed in this experience. So we do have this and all the resources and materials available on the Institute website, which I will hyperlink at the end and provide as a follow-up. Everyone will have access to these slides that you can reference later. So how do you utilize these resources? So I know this is not new to everyone because many of you are already using educational resources, tools, frameworks, images in your work, whether in your prevention work, in your outreach, education awareness, and social media campaigns, and all the various materials and literature that you are developing for the victims and survivors and families that you work with, for the abusive partners that you may be providing treatment for. But we really wanted to encourage folks to think of all the different ways, similar to the Power and Control Wheel, similar to the Lifetime Spiral, of how these specific resources can be used in different settings. So in some of the conversations that we had throughout the development of the resources and the project as a whole, we really hope and encourage, and for whom these resources were developed for and by, is that our community, our Pasifika peoples, our Native Hawaiian Pacific Island community will utilize these materials to start and to normalize the difficult conversations that are needed and necessary to address and prevent domestic and other forms of gender-based violence in our families, in our relationships, in our extended clans and villages. I know certainly in my experience as an advocate, the Power and Control Wheel was such a powerful tool in every interaction that I had with a survivor who was coming to us in crisis. So some of them may be coming because of the immediate danger that they were in and were fleeing a situation. And sometimes survivors would be coming to us after 20 plus years of no longer being in the relationship. But the opportunity of utilizing a resource and tool like the Power and Control Wheel or cultural specific materials and literature and resources like this is to help survivors to name and to articulate the experiences that they had. And it certainly can be, you know, in support of some of their goals in getting safety and holding their abusive partners accountable. So that could be certainly, you know, when they are filing for protection orders or in other legal matters, but definitely in the healing aspect, aspect of just naming and articulating the experiences that they had. We're hoping that these resources will be utilized in various community-based settings. So certainly in our victim services agencies and teen dating violence programs, among youth groups and clubs, but we also want to be expansive of what we mean about community-based, because we know that many of our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander survivors, family members, will not talk to law enforcement, will not necessarily reach out to or access traditional victim services agencies, but they may talk to their pastor, their minister, or youth group leader in their church, or to someone at school, or somebody in their sports club, or their coach. So we're hoping that folks that are in these different settings, who may not feel like they are the experts or that they have the capacity, that they can start by reading through these cultural specific resources to give them some language, to start somewhere in initiating these conversations. It certainly can benefit systems responses. So definitely in prosecution, in courts, in healthcare settings, when we're thinking of our medical interpreters that are providing those services for victims in these various settings, and certainly in program development, curriculum design, program policies, and research, and absolutely in policy advocacy. So I just went through a whole lot. Let me just check the chat again. Thank you. So a final takeaway that I wanted to share and impart with you all is really, again, emphasizing the importance of cultural values and community expertise in our anti-violence movement and field work. So highlighting and really understanding and articulating and naming cultural values that a community adheres to, and to look at relationships in a holistic way, not just between two people, but certainly within a family setting, within the family unit or system, in the larger extended family, in the larger clans and villages. And then also, when I mean a holistic view of knowing the connection between people and environments and our ancestor and our lineages and our genealogies is such an important opportunity that we don't want to miss when we're developing these programs, resources, and tools. And absolutely privileging and honoring the language, traditions, and protocols of a community. I was overwhelmed with emotion and felt so honored to be witness and to observe and to participate in the various listening sessions that we hosted. And mind you, these sessions were meant to inform the translation process and the resource development process. But what we were privileged to hear was the experiences of survivors who felt brave and confident enough to share their trauma and their background and their histories. We were so fortunate to hear songs and chants throughout the different sessions, to listen to the stories of our gods and deity and ancestors. It was so affirming and so enriching and nourishing. And another takeaway is about prioritizing connection and stories. And I think this resonated well for our colleagues at domestic abuse intervention programs. When talking about how the Power Control Wheel and other resources like this could be utilized in group settings, I think the importance of the practice of storytelling and sharing life experience is, as a process, is the way, it's the healing and therapeutic aspect that we can't emphasize enough. And it's certainly a cultural practice and value that is just fundamental to Pacifica peoples, which is, and it's not unique just to us, but in many cultures. And then the last, again, is about community leadership. And so continuing the thread of community being the experts of their experience, and also in developing and identifying the solutions to gender-based violence and domestic violence, is really uplifting and supporting the leadership of these community members as consultants, as participants, and certainly in the movement and field work, as the advocates who become the administrators, the program managers and directors of these organizations. Definitely in supporting talent pool of Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders becoming the researchers, right? We have such a gap and a need for disaggregated data and research about Pacifica peoples related to gender-based violence in the US and our affiliated territories. So finally, I just wanted to leave this quote from our beloved Tamana Paul Otoko, because a common thread, what we were constantly aware of and hypersensitive to, was just dealing with the stigma associated with domestic violence and gender-based violence. Just speaking about these things directly with our community. And in a conversation, kind of debriefing in the listening sessions, debriefing from the project, Tamana Paul had shared that really to him as a cultural practitioner and as an elder, a respected elder in his community, that conversations and projects like these, and I'm gonna quote what he said, it is the beginning of a dialogue that blends into bigger talks. So we know that our anti-violence work is a process, right? It's a constant process and decision to prioritize these conversations and this process to end domestic violence and other forms of gender-based violence. So I have provided the links to additional resources that I really encourage you all to look up and utilize. I've referenced them already in the presentation. And first is the reports and all the materials from the Pasifika Power Control Wheel translation project. The second is the lifetime spiral of gender violence. So you can see the visual and the tool in its entirety. And then also our A to Z advocacy model for Asian and Pacific Islander survivors, including our database of all the cultural specific organizations across the US and territories that are providing this cultural specific work in service provision. I really, really encourage you to take a look at the community-based participatory research toolkit, which the Institute developed and created in partnership with other organizations. And then also to kind of peruse our in-language domestic violence, sexual assault resources that are on our website, just so you can see all the different examples of those in-language resources. So thank you. Thank you everyone for listening. I wanted to give you all a chance to ask some questions, and I think I've already seen some in the chat. Okay, I see one question. And Shirley, if you see any others that I might have missed, let me know. So Ariana asked, let's see, so I'll share Ariana's comment. I think the way you're discussing the impact of this project is so powerful. I agree that seeing one's experiences reflected in a resource like this can be powerful simply in that it validates that you are not the first person to go through this. What do you envision as the next steps for this project? Or what would you like to see this work develop into next in a perfect world? Thank you, Ariana. So what we hope and envision, I believe, the next steps for this project is the promotion of the materials themselves, because of the fantastic work of our community consultants and partners. So promoting the utilization. So we have that right now in plan, a toolkit to share with our constituents, with our listserv, with our network, in promoting the resources and tools. I'm just so honored and proud of the consultants from our community that did this work. It was an honor and privilege to witness their work ethic and their passion and commitment and dedication, because this was incredibly time-consuming and complex. We had not done this specific type of work before. And just integrating our community feedback throughout the whole process, we would love to get that feedback again. And that was part of our commitment, you know, in our community-based, survivor-centered, cultural-specific values and guiding principles of practice, is that as these materials are rolled out, we hope that the community at large will provide us with feedback. to help inform and update these resources, and to attend to the ever-changing needs of our diverse diaspora. And then the second part of that project, what would I like to see? So what I would like to see is more languages and cultural specific communities that can do this work. So for example, Reggie, we could only get Reggie, our amazing Siapo maker and artist, for our Samoan team and for the Samoan translation work. So we'd love to commission art for our other Pasifika Island groups to do this work. So we hope we can expand it further. Okay, thank you. Okay, so another question. What do you suggest for someone working with a Pasifika survivor with these resources and translations if we aren't Pasifika ourselves? Thank you so much for that excellent question. I actually had this conversation with our consultant partners about the implications of use of these very cultural specific resources and materials. So what I would recommend as an ally, so if you are not of the community, as an ally, to read through the resources, to educate yourself. We want you, and we want folks outside of our communities to learn about our culture, to understand our worldview and experiences. But as far as its actual implementation and utilization, if your organization or you as a professional are not fluent or privy or identify within these cultural specific communities, I really encourage you, as we talk about community as the experts, is to ensure that those who may be in your organization who do identify, who are from the community, to support their skills and leadership development to utilize the resource. And to recruit folks, right? To recruit folks and bring folks in as the professionals to utilize and implement these resources and tools. So that was the feedback that we received from the community. If you're not of the community, we definitely encourage you to read through them, to learn from them, but to support and mentor and develop the skills and leadership of those from the community to utilize the resources and work. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Please, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. So you have our website, our number, our info email. So if you have additional questions for myself, or questions about the project, the resource materials themselves, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And again, these slides, which are hyperlinked, will be available to everyone. And all the resources, frameworks, and materials from the project are live and available for digital download on the Institute's website. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here and joining us today. I hope you leave with some tangible ideas of ways that you can utilize, whether it's these resources themselves or developing your own plan for developing culture specific materials. And we're happy and excited to support you in that journey. Thanks. Hi. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Puna. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I see a lot of thanks and appreciations in the chat for you and for the project consultants putting this report and, of course, the webinar together. Just uplifting one comment in the chat. A resource is an important tool and a starting point, but should not be a substitute for having a community member present to support survivors. I think that's so true and conveyed very well in what you shared today. We will, yeah, I don't see any additional questions. If you have any, feel free to reach out to us in the contact information on the screen. We will share this recording of the webinar on our website. And then, of course, the report and all the other materials that Puna mentioned are already on our website on the link that I provided earlier. Please help us share to those you work with, those you know, other organizations and colleagues. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Have a great day.